Hello, good evening. Welcome to episode 64 of the Tunnel Podcast, the greatest podcast in the world. Delighted to say I'm joined by Tom Goff. Tom, bit of change of background for me tonight. I didn't know whether I would go into the bedroom. The wife's in the bath. I thought she's going to need stuff when she comes out. I don't know, so I just carried on in the kitchen, mate. So, how are you? All right?
I'm all right, mate. I'm all right. Yeah, not too bad. I just had my lemon and scampi flavoured knickknacks, mate.
Oh yeah, you sent me them, didn't you? Was that a B&M fine?
Mate, that was a fine. That was in the range. That was an absolute that was like Indiana Jones, finding that little the little golden little statue, man. I was just like, it was glowing at me, but yeah, they were top drawer, man. But then I was having an argument with someone. What's the best knick-knack flavour?
Well, I don't like the purple ones. I'm putting.
You don't like the ribbon? See, I like the ribbon saucy, mate. They're good.
I'm gonna. It's a straight shootout between spicy and scampi.
Yeah, probably is spicy in it, man. They are elite. To be fair, I think.
If I've not had a drink, I'll go spicy. But if I've had a couple of beers, I'll go scampi.
Yeah. Good shout.
Anyway, crisp chat. Listen, we know who the finalists are for the playoff. Next Saturday, 3:00 kickoff, by the way, confirmed. So all that chatter we had at the start of the last podcast was for nothing. I even got into a bit of not a debate, but an exchange with somebody on X last night, a journalist who said that the Scottish Cup final was the problem. But yeah, I could do a podcast on Scottish football playing second fiddle to English football for the last decade. Anyway, yes, we've got a finalists. Sheffield United against Sunderland. We're going to go back to Monday night if we can. Let's start with the game at Bramall Lane. I was there. Sheffield United broke a record because I think it's the biggest aggregate score in a playoff semi, 6-0. And I have to say, Tom, I kind of called it on what night did we speak? Sunday night. I kind of felt that Bristol City, the mentality wasn't right. Going into the playoffs, and I think we kind of saw that, on Monday night. For all they huffed and puffed, and yeah, they did have a couple of shots at Michael Cooper's goal, majority from distance. I don't think they ever really gave any glimpse that they were going to turn that tie around.
No, that's it. Look, you got to feel from a bit, obviously, what happened in the first leg. Ultimately, that sending off has just changed the dynamic completely, hasn't it? Of the two ties, in that it's allowed. Don't say allowed, because look, I think it was clear to see in that second leg that Sheffield United are a superior team. The gap between the two in terms of the points they got over the course of the season, confirms that they're a much better team, much better squad, etc. But ultimately, that red card in the first leg was pivotal. It would have been, looking back, it would have been interesting, wouldn't it? To if that red card had not happened, 0-0 at half time, which it looked like it was going to be, as to how that second half would play out. It might have been a different story in the second leg. But look, I still firmly believe that over the course of the two legs that Sheffield United would have showed their class and that they would have got through to the final, at Wembley. I don't know. Look, I disagree with you slightly. I think it's, I've seen Bristol City getting some serious stick. People saying that they're the worst playoff side, and all right, like you pointed out, the 6-goal over the two legs, that 6-goal deficit there. That on paper, yes, they are, but like I said, the red card played a massive part in that. And yeah, I don't know, mate. I just think it was just golfing class at the end of the day. I just think Sheffield United turned up, like we spoke about them before the playoffs started. I felt like they were in a good place going into playoffs. I think they, when they dropped out of that automatic promotion chase, it had come at a really good time for them, because it gave them about 3 or 4 games, I think, to kind of regather themselves, recuperate. Wilder to try and change the mentality, get them ready for the playoffs. And they did exactly that. They just looked focused, switched on. All their big players turned up, and it was comfortable for them in the end. And like we both said in the last pod we did, Bristol City, 3 goals. It was very unlikely, but it was still doable. But they had to go for it. They had to throw caution to the wind. And look, they did have a bit of pressure at the start. Obviously, you were there. They applied a bit of pressure, but like you pointed out, there was no real clear-cut opportunities created. Like you said, there was a few shots from distance. There was a few crosses kind of flashing across the box. But yeah, like you said, I struggle to think of Cooper being really tested. And then I just think, Sheffield United, their game plan was, they were probably expecting a bit of a flurry at the start, just kind of hold on, let that ride out, and then, we'll take control of the game. And that's exactly what happened. As soon as, that kind of little spell was over for Bristol City, Sheffield United just took control in it, and that was it then till the end of the game, wasn't it?
Yeah, look, I do want to focus more on Bristol City. I think we said plenty about Sheffield United the other night. What is it then with Bristol City? I know we can talk about a golfing class, and I'll acknowledge that. But at the same time, is it the lack of experience from the manager in terms of being in this position before? Is it the fact that they've got quite a threadbare squad, that they've got a good 11? There's a couple of attacking options off the bench, but it's not a meaty squad. They've got a very specific style of play, and if you stop them playing that way, then they are quite ineffective.
Yeah, look, I think it's a combination of all the things we've discussed, mate. I think you make a great point in terms of their starting 11. I read some stat that I think is it Jason Knight in midfield played every minute of every game, and I was reading this little article, and there was a few others in the Bristol team that were not far behind him. So you're right, they had over the vast majority of the season that he had a starting 11 that he was just dependent on for the whole season. So you're probably right that there was maybe a bit of tiredness in some of those legs. And like you said, you look at Sheffield United in comparison, the strength, the strength and depth that they've got, how strong the players are that are coming off their bench. I think you're right. I think that that probably did play a small part. Experience, like you said, Chris Wilder, Sheffield United, maybe, a lot of those players obviously knew working under Chris Wilder, but Chris Wilder himself has experience of managing teams in the playoffs. And you look at a lot of those players in that Sheffield United team have had experience playing in the playoffs for other teams. So I think you're right there. I think, in terms of the 2 starting 11s and the players that did have, experience competing in the playoffs, Sheffield United had a hell of a lot more than Bristol City did. So, yeah, I agree. I think, all these things added up and ultimately, they all played their part. But look, one thing that does need to be said, and it wasn't getting said enough, is, Bristol City, whilst they do have a good team for this level, competitive team, can give anyone a game on their day. Sheffield United spent a lot of money in the summer, made a lot of signings, top signings for this level. Came down from the Premier League, so they had the parachute payments, at their disposal to strengthen their team. And Bristol City, Manning, to be fair to him, was kind of, he was working with a very restricted budget. I don't think they made a single signing in January, did they? I feel like that does need to be mentioned. And again, that just, for me, shows you what a fantastic job Manning did, considering that they didn't strengthen in January, for them to then go on the run that they did, which then got him into the playoffs, is even more of a great achievement. But then again, coming back to what you said, I think you're spot on. Those guys definitely, a little, well, more than a little bit, there was definitely, an element of fatigue there, I think, with some of those players. they're big guys. You know, they're big names, especially the two guys in midfield, kind of, you know, linchpin of that team. You know, I didn't think they played particularly well at all, and yeah, it's a shame really, but you know, it's not only that golfing class that showed for me; it's that golfing, you know, spending power as well. You know, the two combined.
Interesting point you made there about, you know, the budget at Ashton Gate. Had the chairman speaking after, or the owner speaking after the game, saying won't change. They won't be going out splurging loads of cash. So Liam Manning's going to be in the same situation next season. I heard in the debrief that he had individual conversations with each player. So I mean, if you're a Bristol City fan, what are your expectations next year? Is it just reverting back to type? Is it going to be one of those kind of mediocre seasons where we maybe bob around just outside the playoffs, or is there an expectancy now that we are a playoff team now? We need to get a build on that. How do you see that kind of playing out?
Yeah, I read the same article that you've referenced there, and you know, I'd probably be a bit disappointed. But I'm more than a bit disappointed if I was a Bristol City fan reading that, because you know, look, I don't think any team in the Championship, you know, maybe other than the teams that come down who've got those parachute payments, is going to spend loads of cash. But you at least want, you know, the chairman to be saying, you know, we will strengthen Liam where possible. You know, we will try and add to the squad this summer. You know, we haven't got millions and millions to spend, as the fans know, but you know, we will make every attempt possible to, you know, build on the season that we've had, you know, getting into the playoffs. But yeah, I felt it was very negative. It was almost like, you know, he was almost trying to rein in the fans' expectations a little bit by, you know, I might be reading between the lines too much here, but it was almost like, you know, this was maybe a bit of a fluke, you know, considering we've got no money to spend and we're not going to be spending any next season. You know, I don't know. Maybe it just come out wrong. You know,
No, I think you're on something. It comes across that what they've achieved was unexpected.
Yeah,
it wasn't where they were setting the sights, and then it feeds into the point I made before, that it was an achievement in itself that they got in there. They were kind of relieved and surprised, and I think that culminated in a mentality block. Whereas a side like, I don't know, Blackburn, for instance, or Millwall might have attacked that differently. I don't think Alex Neil would have gone into those playoffs with the same mentality that Liam Manning did. Maybe I'm being harsh.
Yeah. Well, look, you're not being harsh. You know, like you said, you know, I know we're reading between the lines a little bit but you know what Liam Manning was saying before, you know, the first leg was exactly, you know, what you've just described there. Was almost a bit like, you know, we've done incredibly well just getting to the playoffs. You know, anything else is kind of a bonus. You know, almost, you know, we're not expecting to do anything now. We've got here. That was a surprise. You know, job's done. I'm happy. The players are happy. And it's like I said, I don't know whether it was, I think it was maybe, yeah, it must have been before the first leg against Sheffield United. Was I think what you're trying to hint at is like, you got to use that underdog status to your advantage. And you probably are right. You know, a team like Millwall, you know, especially, you know, if they'd gone in there, I think, you know, their mindset would be, you know, well, you know, let's mix things up here, you know, and no one expected us to get here. Let's try and surprise a few people. And I think that would have been maybe, you know, probably the message that would have been coming across from Alex Neil as well. Like you said, I think you're right in that maybe Liam Manning should have been a bit more, you know, we're not here to make the numbers up. We've had a great season. All right, we snuck in on the last day kind of thing. But, you know, we've shown we can compete with Sheffield United over the 2 games in the season. We want to get into the Premier League. I think you make a valid point, you know, and I think he'll probably look back and maybe think, I should have maybe said a few things differently in those interviews before the games. You know, took a different stance. You know, tried to, you know, try and lift the players. You know, we obviously don't know what goes on behind closed doors in the dressing room on the training pitch, I'm sure he would have been trying to get that message across to him. But, as you're the face of the club, aren't you? And, it's not just the players, etc. It's the fans as well. They want to believe, don't they? They want the manager, the head coach to get them fired up, get them believing that they can win this and get into the Premier League, the promised land. So, yeah, I think you're right. And again, I think, like I said, I think he'll look back at it and kind of definitely think he could have maybe answered a few questions differently. But again, I reckon that ties into what you said also. They haven't been on the playoffs for a long, long time. They've been in the Championship for a while now, kind of lingering in and around mid-table. Whereas the other teams, the other teams in there have either been in, got promoted and come back down, or Sunderland, Coventry, were in the playoffs a couple of seasons ago. So yeah, I think that's another valid point.
I always think it's very telling when the opposition manager is complimenting, they're a good side, they gave us a tough game. When they've won, and Bristol City won the game, Chris Wilder wouldn't have been complimentary about them, trust me. Another telling fact as well, Bristol City need a striker. They need something up top. Naki Wells is getting on. I know they're actually looking at giving him another year, I believe. I read that yesterday or today. Yeah. I know Sinclair Armstrong didn't get on, but he's not.
He's been a flop, really. He's been a big disappointment for him because Bristol City, like we've just been discussing, they don't have a lot of money to spend, and I think they spent it was about 1.2, 1.5, no more than that, but that's a lot of money for him. That was a big chunk of their budget went on Armstrong in the summer, and the expectancy was that he was going to be the main man up front. He was going to be the guy to replace Naki Wells and score the goals, and it's just never happened. Like you said, they've once again had to rely on Naki Wells to spearhead the attack. So you're right. Armstrong's either got to step up, or they've got to dip back into that transfer market. And what are you laughing at?
Those scampi fries are repeating on you.
I know they are, man. He's either got to step up, or they've got to dip back into that transfer market. Because, like you said, I think to be fair to Naki Wells, I've said it for a few seasons now that he's done. He ain't going to be scoring goals, again this season, and he continues to do so. So
he's in great shape. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, credit's where credit's due, and I think offering him a new contract's wise because I still think he could be a great player to have in the squad. He's experienced.
How many games has he played this season?
Pardon?
He can't play as many games as
that's exactly it. So, and this is what. Going full circle to what you're saying about the chairman is that Bristol City aren't, if they can keep their best players, which I think they've got a very good chance of doing so, they just need to add, 2 or 3, 4 max to that squad just to enhance that team, but like you said, the vibes that you've got from the chairman and what he was saying straight afterwards is that Manning's going to do well to get those players in, So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the summer because, as well, I do feel like Manning he's definitely, enhanced his reputation with what he's done at Bristol City, and this is the other thing, isn't it? If he gets no backing whatsoever, and he gets off to a tough start because they haven't been able to strengthen in the summer, maybe lost a couple of players as well. Then, first opportunity he gets to move somewhere where he will get a bit of backing, a bit of money to spend, etc. Then, he's going to be, taking that into serious consideration, isn't he? I feel like if they want to keep Manning and build something with him there at the club, then they've got to at least try and support him a bit and let him bring a few players in the summer.
It's that old Stevie Gerrard quote: "Fix the roof while the sun is shining," isn't it? Okay. Just on Sheffield United, Kiefer Moore. I took a lot of stick. I don't know if you saw it. Done a blind ranking of Championship strikers about Kiefer Moore in the top 3. I think I put him in ahead of Haji Wright. I got some absolute pelters. But I just felt, and I think this is the point I want to make, Tyrese Campbell's been arguably Sheffield United's best striker this season, yeah? You're not going to argue that point. Is that fair?
No, 100%, yeah.
And he's not going to start the playoff final. Kiefer Moore is. I'll put my money on right now.
mate, it's you've got to tip your hat to Wilder on that one, because like you said, Campbell, has been their main man. I think everyone was expecting him to lead the line. If Moore was going to play, then it was going to be with Campbell alongside him. I don't think anyone expected Campbell to be, dropped for those games. So, hats off to Wilder, because for whatever his thought process was for bringing Kiefer Moore into that starting 11, then it worked, didn't it? He was absolutely fantastic. I felt over the two legs. I thought the pivotal moment, obviously that red card in the first game. I thought it was great forward play from Moore in terms of anticipating the ball over and getting himself in front of the defender and drawing him into the foul. That moment was Moore's doing. And after that, and then for the game in the second leg as well, he was just everything you wanted from your number 9. Big and strong, holding up play, winning the flick-ons, absolute menace from set pieces. He was absolutely fantastic, and it's like I said, Wilder definitely deserves some credit for bringing him back into the mix, because he was pivotal in both games. And
well, he gets the first goal the other night, and almost there was a relief lifted around the ground. I get into my seat, and I see the guy next to me says, "Oh, what do you think the score's going to be tonight?" And I said 3 or 4, and he said, "No way." He said, "We don't do things the easy way." And there was a kind of not an anxiety around the ground, but I think everyone kind of felt if Bristol City get the first goal here, then there's going to be a chance of making their tails up. So him getting that first goal, as I say, seemed to kind of settle them down, and they started playing some great stuff, especially second half. I thought when again Chris Wilder makes the subs, O'Hare comes on. There was a down the left hand side, my right, as I was looking at the pitch, there was him, Tyrese Campbell, and maybe Ryan Brewster playing some just one touch. So it was like Ole. The crowd were kind of Ole in every pass, when it gets to back in the stage. But I did want to talk about Vinny Souza. I don't know what you thought about his display in both ties. I think he goes kind of unnoticed at times. He's an absolute monster. I really thought he dominated the midfield on Monday night.
Yeah, again, he's a fantastic midfielder. When he was out injured for him, they missed him massively. He's such an important player for him, and like you said, he's it's like Tanaka at Leeds. They're just they're so important to how the team operates and performs, because like you said, they just do all the dirty work, don't they? They just do all the tidying up, protecting the back four. But both of them are really comfortable on the ball as well, and picking it up and moving it on quickly to the forward players. And I thought he was brilliant. It's weird because I've watched Sheffield United quite a few times over the course of the season, but most of the time he's been out. I haven't actually been able to watch him that many times over the course of the season. So it was, and I think I was looking on Who Scored, the data website the other day, and I think he finished as the highest rated central midfielder in the championship. So I was really eager to see him play over the course of the two legs, and he definitely lived up to the hype. I thought he was brilliant, and he seems quite a calming presence as well. I quite like his attitude. There's a few what do you call them? Well, there's a few shithouses, isn't there, in that Sheffield United team? That probably instructed by Wilder to kind of wind people up and get in the faces of opposition and this, that, and the other, the dark arts and this, that, and the other. But he seems quite a very kind of, calming presence. He does get fired up, but he does it in the right way. He just concentrates on his game, and he lets his football and his display do the talking, which I love. So, he's brilliant. Absolutely, I thought he was brilliant over the two ties, and I with him, I definitely feel like if Sheffield United aren't to win this final and go up to the Premier League, then I can see a lot of teams being interested in him. I think he he definitely has the ability to step up to the Premier League. And I believe he's mid-20s as well. I think he's still quite relatively young, you know. So yeah, he's a great player, really top draw.
Yeah, well, he's a class above, and I think he'll take the step up, no problem at all.
Yeah.
Chris Wilder, will he be thinking about not going up? I don't think so, but you know, Michael Cooper and Vinny Souza will have suitors, no doubt. Just lastly on Sheffield United, because I think it's been a problem area. Yeah, I'm going to say a problem area this season. Right back of Alfie Gilchrist, Harry Clark, the other lad whose name evades me, who got injured.
Gilchrist.
No, there was the lad that's been playing the last few weeks and got injured. I forget his name. It'll come to me. I'll have a look in a minute. But Hamza Chowdhury's kind of fell in there.
Yeah.
And he's, you know, I've got to say, for a central midfielder, he's doing a sterling job at right back. Yeah,
no, it's funny because last season at Leicester in the Championship, he ended up having to fill in as centre back for Leicester, and he was immense for them in the last few games of the season. You know, when it was still in the balance. You know, there was still a chance of Leicester dropping out of the autos, and I remember they were getting a bit short on numbers in defence, and Hamza Chowdhury got put in centre back, and we went to their. I remember West Brom went to their place towards the end of the season, and he was just unbelievable. You know, he was just fantastic. And like you said, I was there thinking, I thought this guy was a midfielder, and he was like playing like prime Maldini, you know, in centre back. And like you say, now he's, you know, like you're right. It's been a problem area for Sheffield United over the course of the whole season. Really, there's been 2 or 3 guys that they've tried and tested there, and it's not really worked. But ever since he's come in, he's just been absolutely rock solid. You know, obviously he's a defensive midfielder. So, yeah, in terms of his attacking output, it's restricted somewhat, but defensively, he's just been absolutely, you know, monstrous, hasn't he, at the back? He's hardly put a foot wrong, and I think that probably balances out well as well with Burrows on the other side, who obviously likes to push forward, get forward as much as possible down that left-hand side, you know, so it just basically means Chowdhury just kind of tucks in and sits back, which, you know, he obviously prefers doing. So, again,
whoever had 27 minutes on the Burrows bingo, you're the winner. 27 minutes. I thought you'd mentioned his name earlier. I've got to say, I know you're a big fanboy of Harrison Burrows, but 27 minutes. Whoever had 27 minutes, you get the prize. Just what you said about Chowdhury being more defensive, probably he doesn't have to go forward when he's got Andre Brooks in front of him. You know, who wants to go defenders, who wants to get forward. So, okay, we'll leave Sheffield United there for a minute. We will come back to them once we've kind of discussed the second legs. I do want to ask you a couple of questions about the head-to-head, but Sunderland Coventry. I don't know about you. I thought the game wasn't brilliant. It wasn't a classic. Almost felt a little bit nervy from both sides. You could tell the magnitude of the game and the impact it was going to have for both clubs. I have to agree with Frank Lampard. It's difficult to say this when Coventry aren't in the final, but I thought they were the better side over both legs, which sounds ridiculous. I know it does. However, I just felt on the night that they didn't capitalise, much like the first leg, Tom.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know why you're saying that it sounds daft. They were the better side over both games. Look, it's one of them, because you've got to give Sunderland credit in that, you know, both games, in my opinion, were a smash and grab. You know, we had the debate, didn't we, on the pod before the second leg, as to whether, you know, Lebris would take the same approach that he did in the first game away, you know, in front of his home fans, considering how well it had worked, obviously, against Coventry in the first leg. And I was saying, you know, I just can't see it, you know, considering, you know, we're going to have an absolutely packed out stadium alight. You know, they're in the lead. You know, I felt like, you know, they were going to take the game to Coventry and try and kill the game off. But, you know, maybe there was a little bit more kind of attacking intent from Sunderland, but there wasn't much. You know, he went with the same starting lineup in all, you know, in the same positions. And early doors, you saw that they were going to sit off Coventry and let them have possession. And yeah, look, I've got nothing against Sunderland. I've been a bit, we've spoke highly of on many occasions over the course of the season. Lebris was one of my contenders for manager of the season, but they're lucky to be in the final, mate. 100%, I feel. And I don't want to say, I don't want to say embarrassed. That's probably not the right word, but I was really surprised at their two performances over the two legs. It was, the way you're talking earlier about kind of the gulf between the teams, etc. It was almost like Coventry were your Sheffield United, your team that were fighting for automatic promotion not that long ago, and that Sunderland were your team that had just snuck in. No one had expected them to get in there, having to play kind of dirty and grind it out and use all the dark arts, etc., to try and somehow get the victory. Where it was the other way around. Sunderland had much more points than Coventry on the board, had a much more successful season. It wasn't towards the last kind of quarter of the season. They were obviously in contention still for the automatic spots, but I just felt it was just a little bit. They were just underwhelming, and I get it. Look, Sunderland fans, are going to go, "Oh, we don't care." We don't care. We're in the final. We got there, and that's all that's important. And they're right. It's a very valid point. But in terms of the two performances, I just felt, I was just very surprised at just how very, very defensive they were in both games. And I don't care what anyone says. They were very fortunate. Coventry were the best team. They just didn't take their opportunities in both games, especially in the second game. Credit to Sunderland in the first game, they really did limit Coventry to more like half chances. There wasn't many clear-cut chances in that first leg. But Coventry had a fair few in this game. And like you said, if they took them, it obviously would have been completely different. And, had you right at the end, he puts that in, his game over. They've won, they've gone through. They're in the final. So, if there's any Sunderland fan out there trying to claim, they were the better team performance-wise over the two legs, and that and on that basis, that's why they're in the final. Then, nah, I'm not having that. I agree with Lampard on this one. I think Coventry definitely, I think they edged it in the first leg, even though they, we're down 2-1, and then in this game, I think they were a much better team. They were the team that were going for it. They were the team that carved out the better opportunities. And can feel incredibly unlucky that they're not going to Wembley come the end of the month.
In stark contrast to what we've just been talking about Bristol City and expectations, I feel Coventry fans' expectations are going to be high next season. I feel that they're going to think that they are now a playoff side. And rightly so, because you've seen signs under Lampard, style of play. He brings in Grimes in January. I think was that the only signing he made. Is he brought in 2 players or 1 player? I think one or two, maybe just one. But regardless, he'll make a couple of additions in the summer, you'd imagine, to bolster that. And I just think that he is going to be maybe under a different kind of pressure next season to go for it again.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely spot on. I think, I definitely feel like Lampard coming in under the circumstances and where Coventry was sat in the table, he almost had, as long as obviously he moved them away from the relegation zone, I think anything over and above that, it was a free pass really. And I think, they were riding the crest of that wave. They were on that fantastic run. And I think a part of that was because no one was expecting it of them. Like you said, it was just, they were just high on confidence. I'm finding it difficult to word it, but what I'm trying to say? It was, you're right. I think next season will be the true test of Lampard and his abilities, because you're absolutely spot on. They will now be, one of a large bunch of teams, but the expectation there from the Coventry fans, and I feel like, the Coventry owner will be, at the very least, to be in and around those playoffs. for the course of the season, and to at least be challenging come the very end. So it's different circumstances. That's what I'm trying to say for Lampard to work.
I think that's because when he came in, a lot of Coventry fans weren't having him. They were still kind of romancing with Mark Robins. It took a while for them to latch onto him, but now they've bought in. They're in with him now. Yeah. He's there at end every home game. He's doing the fist bumps. There's a synergy there that may or may not prove to be maybe their Achilles heel next season if they don't get off that good start. You've got to try and the ups and downs of the Championship. There's going to be two new boys in town that are going to splash the cash. We'll speak about one in a bit in terms of transfers and players they're getting linked to. So there's going to be more of a challenge next season. I don't think it's going to be as wide open as it maybe has been for the playoff spots this year.
No, 100%. It's going to be a tough season next. It's always a tough season, but next season it does look like it's going to be, incredibly difficult. Like you said, due to the clout and the spending power that Birmingham and Wrexham both have. I feel like Ipswich and Southampton. I'm not too sure about Leicester at this moment in time, but I do feel like Ipswich and Southampton will be strong next season. And then obviously you've got all the teams that aren't, who have not been able to make it through the playoffs this season as well. So it's going to be, a real tough looking division, on paper. Look, I think Lampard's done enough to prove that he can keep Coventry there. I think he's done. He's proven me wrong. I got no qualms in saying, I didn't think it was going to work out for Lampard at Coventry. I didn't think he was going to last the season, to be honest with you. So, he's proven me completely wrong, and he did an incredible job, really. All things considered. It's like you said. It's just, I think it's going to be the interesting thing is now the expectations there from the Coventry play. Lampard has basically gotten back to where they should be, and now the test is can he maintain that? Can he improve on that, or will they regress a little bit next season? And again, as it always does in football, it's all going to come down to what how their summer plays out. As to whether he gets some money to strengthen and bring in some players, if he's like him, because obviously the vast majority of these players are still the players, Mark Robins had brought in. Like you said, I think it's only Grimes that Lampard's signing to date. Has been consistently playing first team football. But it's then as well, if they're able to hold on to some of their star players, most notably Radoni, I think there's going to be a few teams sniffing around him come the summer. So, but yeah, if I was a Coventry fan right now, I'd definitely be feeling optimistic going into next season. Obviously, you're devastated given crashing out of the playoffs. It's devastating any time, but in the manner in which they have, it's going to probably take them a while to get over it. But a bit like Bristol, no one was expecting him to be there. And unlike Bristol, they've given it a really good go in the playoffs, and pushed Sunderland all the way to the last kick of the game, basically. So I think again, a lot's going to be dependent on what they do in the summer. But I would be feeling positive if I was a Coventry fan going into next season. I think Lampard's done a fantastic job this season, and he's done it with a squad which isn't his. So if he can bring in a few guys of his liking, start tweaking and moulding the squad a little bit more to how he wants, then I can only see them having another productive season.
It was interesting in his post-match, Lampard, he highlighted Dan Ballard's display and said, he defended well because he had to. We put him under a lot of pressure. Obviously, Ballard goes on and gets the man of the match again. That moment, the header, really unorthodox header. Watched it a load of times. Strange connection, isn't it? But is that up there is the greatest playoff moment alongside Deeney v Leicester? Is it in terms of the occasion, the latest of the goal? Is it up there?
I think so, mate. It's. I think it's not matching or beating the Deeney one. I don't think that'll ever get beaten, from the penalty down the one end being saved and then going up to the other. But it's definitely up there as one of the greatest ever championship moments. And look, I'm not going to lie, man. Like, I was watching the game, neutral. I wasn't really fussed as to who goes through to the final, to be honest with you. Like you said, I just wanted to see a decent competitive match. And when that goal went in, man, that was some scenes. They were some absolutely top tier, scenes in the crowd. The crowd was just going absolutely nuts. And the commentators, everyone was just getting caught up in it. And I was kind of sat there with the old goose pimplies, like I said, I weren't fussed, but it was just one of those moments, isn't it? It's irrelevant who you support. That's, what those fans are going through, what that moment's like from, similar moments with the club you follow, what they're going through at that moment in time, the ecstasy, and like, there's not many things that come close to it, is there, man? So yeah, it was definitely spine tingling. And there was something definitely poetic about the fact that it was Ballard who got the winner, because like you said, over the 2 games, he just defended like a man possessed. Like, I know, I've seen plenty of him. He's a top defender. Got a big future ahead of him. But like I said, he was just like
John Terry of old, wasn't he? It was like
that was it. Yeah, he was like prime John Terry, just throwing himself in front of everything, winning everything. Every ball that come into the box, he was winning it. Just completely bullied Haji Wright over the course of the 2 matches, completely threw him off in the 2 games. He was non-existent. And then when he did get a sniff, he fluffed it. So yeah, if one player deserved to score that goal out the Sunderland team, then it was most definitely him. And like I said, mate, like I said, I don't support Sunderland. I'm a West Brom fan, but I've probably watched that goal going probably at least 10 plus times, on social media now, just to see the crowd going absolutely ballistic. Different, people who've got it on their phone and stuff. You don't get tired of it, do you? So, but this is sorry, mate.
About the importance of not leaving the stadium early to get just a last minute goal. But imagine a last minute goal in that scenario added on to it. It's just as you say.
Well, obviously everyone was there thinking it was going to penalties. So, I can't imagine there would have been many that had left the stadium. But yeah, I feel sorry for anyone that did have to leave for whatever reason and missed that, because that's going to be up there with every one of those Sunderland fans. It's one of their best moments ever. Regardless of what happens in the final, they'll remember that goal, forever now, and the scenes afterwards. So it was definitely a class moment. But look, I was sat there as well feeling sorry for Coventry, because my take is the same as you, mate. I felt they were the better team over the course of the 2 games. At the very least, they deserved taking it to a penalty shootout where it's flip of a coin stuff, then, isn't it, down to the goalkeepers. So that's football, mate, and that's why we love it, isn't it? So
I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about the final, but before we do that, and he's deleted this tweet, and I'm so glad that I took a screenshot. I couldn't find it then because he's deleted it, this chap, Graham Bandiera. Maybe that's not his, I don't know if that's his real name, but Graham, he looks fairly middle-aged, to be fair, probably in his 50s. And he's put, Sheffield United finished 22 points ahead of Bristol City. Why is this even happening? Scrap the playoffs. First, second and third go up. This is an absolute farce.
Yeah, I saw that.
Take it away.
Look, I'm a West Brom supporter, and we have been in the playoffs in my lifetime. We've been in the playoffs 4 times in my lifetime, and not once have we ever got promoted via the playoffs. So you'd probably think I'd be sat here going, yeah, scrap the playoffs. I hate them, but I love them, man. They're just like pure drama. I will say this though, and I'm a big advocate of this, and I cannot believe still in this day and age that it hasn't been tweaked as of yet, and they've still stuck with the same format as they did in day one. I definitely feel that there needs to be some advantage given to the third and fourth place teams. And I know there's been discussions in the past, other podcasts, etc., having the team that finishes third, perhaps they're through to, they just have to play one game. It's at home. And, and the other teams involved, so there's some way that an advantage is given to the teams who finished higher up. I definitely think something like that needs to be brought in. Because at the minute,
how would you do that? So you'd have third through to a final, and then fourth and fifth just play because there's no.
Well, no. The way I thought about doing it, and I had this chat with someone not too long ago, is I just said that third and fourth, it's basically you have one game, and that game is played at third and fourth ground, and then fifth and sixth, or whoever's obviously drawn. Those two have to obviously their game. They've got one game. It's a shootout in that game to the final, but it's played at third and fourth. They've got the home advantage. They've got the home fans behind them. The away fans have a bigger allocation, so like they do in the FA Cup. So they're given a decent allocation, but ultimately the team that finishes third and fourth play at home, or you have fifth and sixth have to play an extra game between themselves. They play fourth. The winner plays third. Something like that. Something I feel has to be done to the format to give a better advantage to, especially that third place team, like Sheffield United. You look at the massive gap between them and Bristol. I think there's a valid point in there somewhere in that they're 20-something points ahead of them. It's crazy that it's now down to a 2-match shootout, and both team will get a game at home. The advantage is seen as the fact that Sheffield United will play the second leg at home, but I don't think that's much of an advantage, to be honest with you. I really don't. So I do think something needs to be changed, but I wouldn't want to see the playoffs scrapped at all, man, because it provides for so many teams something to still play for over the course of the season. If you just did 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3 could be like, look at this season for a perfect example. 1, 2, and 3 would have been done ages ago, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely ages ago. So then the rest of the season would have just been nothing for a massive chunk of the division. Whereas what happened?
Do you not think that the playoffs set the EFL aside from the Premier League?
Yeah, 100%.
It's something different.
That's it, mate. It makes it more exciting. Like you said, it makes it more of a spectacle. I know a lot of people out there who are Premier League. That's what they watch. They'd hardly ever touch the Championship, but then they love watching the playoffs at the end of the season, because obviously the playoffs has come from America and and how they set their sports up, etc., etc. But they love jumping in then because like you said, it's just something different. You've got these crazy circumstances where third's playing sixth and he's got 30 more points, but it doesn't matter now. Both teams, 2 matches to get to the final. How are they going to, what's their mindset, the mentality going to be? There's just so many stories in there. And yeah, like I said, mate, I 4 times West Brom been in the playoffs. We've lost out. One time I went to Wembley and watched us lose the bloody derby at Wembley. So I've just experienced heartbreak. But on the flip side of that, I saw us beat Wolves over 2 legs in the semi-final, and they were, 2 of the best moments of my life supporting West Brom is dumping out the Wolves in those semi-final matches. So, I wouldn't want to see it scrapped, not at all, man.
I think it's telling that Graham has deleted his tweet. That's all I'm going to say. Okay, on the final then, Regis Labrice against Chris Wilder. You have said on 3 or 4 pods now about the way Sunderland have set up, the fact that they've gone more defensive, the fact that they're sitting in. I listened to 10, 15 Sheffield United fans on Monday night saying that they don't want Sunderland because of the fact that they sit in, and it's going to invite Sheffield United on, and then they're going to probably try and hit them on the counter, which doesn't really suit Chris Wilder's side. Do you think it's been that sort of entrenched in Ridge's thought that he knows I'm going to play Wilder here, that it's been that convoluted, or do you think he's just playing it game by game? Tell me.
No, I think you're right. I'm glad you said that, because I agree 100%. I think there was definitely, in terms of how they've approached these two games with Coventry, I definitely think there was some future planning there from Lebris, in that, look, no disrespect to Bristol City, but there's very, very strong possibility that very, very strong chance, that Sheffield United are going to get to the final. So if we're to get to the final, we're going to have to play in a certain way if we want to beat them in that final. And like you said, going toe to toe, in terms of attacking and going for it and trying to score goals. Like you said, you're just going to play into Sheffield United's hands. And it's like I was messaging you, weren't we, whilst you were at the game? I was saying, I bet you Sheffield United fans would rather Coventry, because full well Coventry and Lampard, with his approach, how he wants to play the game, they go for it. They try and score goals. They try and win matches. A lot of forward play down the flanks, getting balls into the box. And that would have likely played into, a lot of overlapping from the wing backs. It would have played into Sheffield United's hands. And I think, and you said, yes, spot on. I'm talking to a few guys here who are saying the same thing. They want Cov because we know that they'll come at us. They'll have a go at us, and that will allow us to, implement our attacking game better than someone like Sunderland, who, are going to sit deep. They're going to put everyone behind the ball. They're going to let Sheffield United have possession in their own half up until the halfway line, and they're going to try and catch them out on the counter attack and catch them out from set pieces. And it's interesting what you say about Kiefer Moore as well. And again, it's going to be really intriguing to see what Wilder does, because with Kiefer Moore they do go a bit direct at times. They mix it up and obviously go direct to play into Kiefer Moore's strengths, which is understandable. But we've been talking about Dan Ballard. How impressive not only he was, but O'Neill as well.
Trey Hughes, playing, he was really good.
Yeah, playing direct and balls into the box. Etc. Sunderland probably aren't going to mind that, because they've got two guys who are just playing unbelievably well at the moment. Defensively, cleaning up all those high balls into the box, in those two legs against Coventry. So, will he feel like maybe playing someone like Campbell instead, off the shoulder with a bit more pace is the better approach to take against those guys? Or, does he stick with Moore and see how it plays out? He definitely has got a decision to make there, because Sunderland are going to play exactly how they have against Coventry. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So, is Kiefer Moore good enough to be in that little pocket and pick the ball up and link others in? And I don't know. Is Campbell the one who's going to be better suited to playing that way?
This could be the best analysis we've done all season. I'm not even going to lie, because as you say, if Chris Wilder's watched those two games, Dan Ballard's just gobbled every ball up that's went in the box, majority of it anyway. So if you then got confidence in the likes of Hamer, the likes of Andre Brooks to put in better delivery, or as you say, Kiefer Moore to kind of rough up Dan Ballard, I think he probably gives Dan Ballard a tougher night than Haji Wright does. I'm going to put my hat on that.
Certainly. Oh yeah, look, Kiefer Moore will, even with Ballard, playing as he did in those first two games, 100%. And like you said, I think Haji Wright just got bullied. He just got completely bullied in those two games. Whereas Kiefer Moore's got a lot of experience, mate, playing at this level. He's a wise head, and he will know how to play against someone like Dan Ballard, 100%. So you're absolutely spot on there. He will give Ballard more to think about, and get stuck in, and the dark arts and giving a bit back and leaving the elbow in, etc. There was none of that from Haji Wright. Absolutely none of it. Whereas there will be plenty of that from Kiefer Moore, 100%.
He was a soft touch, Haji Wright, which I think that's just not in Kiefer Moore's makeup. He's not.
No, 100%. But it's just that it's that that sitting in, Sunderland sitting in, and will Kiefer Moore be suited at? He very much likes to play on the shoulder, with the defender almost like on him. It's not so much about him trying to break away from the defender and find little pockets of space and turn and move forward, or take it out wide and play on the shoulder and chase the ball down into the line, etc. This is what I mean. It's going to be a serious decision for Chris Wilder to make. I don't know whether he can incorporate both of them into the team. I'm trying to think. Because Hamer was playing out on the left, wasn't he? And he had Brooks in the second leg. Who did he play out on the right in the first leg? Because it wasn't Brooks. Was it Raksaki in the first game?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I know he came.
No, it was Bruce. Did he start Brewster in the first game?
Yeah, he started Brewster in the first one.
Because the other thing is, does he play Callum O'Hare in the number 10? Because that would maybe be.
I think he's been brilliant.
Yeah, he's been absolutely brilliant in the 2 games coming off the bench. And if you're looking for a kind of player who's who's kind of floats and trying to find little pockets of space and works in tight areas, quick feet, linking the play, etc., then he's absolutely perfect for that. And I think the game against Sunderland could potentially suit how he plays. He could be an important player for him. But yeah, this is the thing though with Sheffield United, man. He's got options there. So like you said, Wilder will, he'll watch those 2 matches back multiple times, no doubt, before now, and the game, and him and his team will be thinking, how can we break this resolute, top draw Sunderland back line. How can we get past them? But like I said, Coventry managed to do it on quite a few occasions in that second leg. So it's not absolutely impossible. They'll be looking at those chances Coventry carved out and thinking, well, this is what worked for Coventry, this is what didn't work, and so on. But it's again, like, look, I think in terms of if Coventry had got to the final, it would have been a bit more of a basketball game. I feel 2 teams going for it, trying to score goals, but it'll definitely be an intriguing final because Sunderland are 100% are going to set up like they did in the 2 games against Coventry, because I do feel like that's their best chance of getting the win and getting to the Premier League, is to frustrate Sheffield United, snatch a goal somehow from a counter or a set piece, then get back locked in, frustrate them, start time wasting.
It's why he's playing 2 up front now for counter-attack, surely.
100%. Yeah, that's exactly it. And like you said, he'd be foolish not to, in my opinion. And look, this is just the point I'm trying to make was I feel doing it against Coventry was, like I said, I don't want to say embarrassing, but I think Sunderland maybe showed Coventry a little bit too much respect. I think they could have took it to him more than they did. Like I said, they're going to say we got through, but but Sunderland taking that approach against Sheffield United, then I can understand that 100%. It makes sense to me. Do you know what I mean? So look, it's going to be fascinating. It really is. And what you want is I genuinely cannot. I am probably leaning more towards Sheffield United than Sunderland, but I do think it's going to be a real tight one. I think it's going to be a real close encounter. It's probably not going to be, the most enjoyable game to watch, but it's going to be close. I don't think Sheffield United are going to run away with it. Absolutely not, like they did in the first game against Bristol City.
Okay, listen, we had another couple of talking points, but do you know what? I'm going to keep them for Sunday night because we'll probably have nothing to talk about on Sunday night because we've maxed out here tonight. But yeah, what we're going to do as well is when we go into once the playoff final's been done and we've dealt with that into the summer, I think we'll maybe just go down to kind of short, sharp 30-minute pods, just dealing with the kind of daily news that's coming through, because you don't want to listen to us rambling on for 30 minutes about a transfer between Wrexham and Fulham, which we'll speak about on Sunday. We'll try that on Sunday. But yes, there's been Beale dipping out as always. I think at one point we had quite a few watching at once, which was good. We will try and get some guests on next week, actually, in the build-up towards the playoff final. We've got Chad. Actually, that brings me to my point. Chad they're trying to fund Chad's trip to Wembley, which I think is brilliant. Noah's coming across, the guy he does the podcast with, and Chad is obviously looking to get funded to get across. If you can support them, we've shared the link. Get involved. I think that's a great story. But yes, if you've joined us tonight, thanks very much. We will see you on Sunday night for a bit of chat about some manager merry-go-round stuff and some transfer news as well. Thanks very much.